Columbus authors Diane Callahan and David Dixon have released a new poetry collection called The Ship and the Storm, and they join me today to discuss it. Welcome, Diane and David.
Hi,
Hi there.
thanks so much for having us.
Yes.
Sure, happy to see local authors make good and get some stuff out there in the published land. So tell me about the collection. The preface mentions that you wrote the pieces jointly with a lot of discussion.
Yes, absolutely. I'll let you take that first.
So the pieces are sort of in conversation with each other. They're not direct responses in terms of the way the poems are arranged, but they're either the poems sit across from one another on the page. And so they're either linked by theme or they're linked by topic or they're linked by approach in terms of the way that the poems are constructed sometimes. Or they're poems that just illustrate a particular like our particular worldviews on a particular subject. And so they're sort of poets in conversation.
Yes, and I think that there are some poems that are more directly related because a lot of maybe half of the poems that we wrote before the collection, maybe a little more than that, and then like we wrote new poems for the collection. And there is a poem called of mine called "Some Changes May Not Be Saved," and that references "Dreams of the Korengal," which is his poem that I paired it with because it wasn't for the collection that I wrote that one. I wrote it like sort of independently, referenced his poem just because like I was like, thinking about it, it's a poem sort of addressed to him. And then but then when I was doing the collection, I was like, well, those will naturally pair together because like it's literally referencing that other poem. So there are a few poems that you can see the direct link more, and then some of the other ones are a little more abstract and that they take a bit more thinking about the pairings. Like there's one that is like a hermit crab poem. Like I wanted like both of us to have like a hermit crab poem as a form, which is, taking the form of another piece. And he has his poem Nine Line, which how would you describe what a nine line
So
is?
a nine line is a so I'm a veteran, and so nine line is the call for, in this case, the nine line medevac call. So a call for evacuating medical, folks who need medical attention. And so yeah, so I Diane wrote her hermit crab poem,
Yes.
care instructions, and then
Mhm.
I wrote one at her request, insistence, however you want to put it. I wrote a poem that uses a similar kind of form structure.
Yes.
So
I've
that
never heard of hermit crab poetry before. I like the idea of it, although I'm going to be making a lot of seafood-based jokes, I think, anytime I hear a hermit crab poem. So it sounds like it's a Lennon McCarthy situation where your names are on both poems, or on your both of your names are on the poems, but that's not necessarily how they arose. Is that an
Yes,
accurate
yes. So
assessment?
there's that, and like there's like so at the in the table of contents we have like our differentiating symbols, which so in the collection, so this is something that people might miss, but they might notice as they're going. So they have like this little wave is mine, and then the little like compass is Dave's.
Okay.
And then so those are above each poem. So you could kind of tell if you wanted, but at the same time, when you're reading it, you might not like go back or think about that. So they're separate enough. But when we do have poems that like I said, like I was like, oh, I wrote a poem about my mom. Go write a poem about your mom, and so that's for me. My August poem is about my mom, and then his is the Christmas poem. And so like I think, and there's other ones where you wrote a poem, and then I was like, oh no, I don't have anything to pair with it, so I need to write something in order to like match it, even if they're sort of thematically linked in like a small way, but then we're sort of more ripping off each other, like
Yes.
improvising, like it's
Right.
more like jazz, as you would probably like to say. You mentioned jazz over a few
Jazz
times.
is a sort of sub theme in quite a few of the poems.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is there a poem you'd like to share that you think maybe embodies some of these ideas that you're discussing?
So I think probably the best way to do this is we'll read the pair of poems. Diane will read her poem, and then I'll read mine, and you can kind of see how the pairing kind of works.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and this is actually, so for me, this is the opening poem of the collection.
And my opening poem as well.
Yes. So it's kind of the tone setter for the collection. So mine is called The Patterns, the Contradictions, after Lucille Clifton. So I am swimming into myself over and over again, lover to the riverbed, cold, so cold but smooth. I am walking alone at night, walking into the near future, where no one holds my hand, with fear of losing me. I am talking to ghosts, made lighter in light of secrets lost, a translucid ghost talker. Goodbye, thinning hair, shoelaces I keep tripping over, I am leaving breadcrumbs of hurt behind me, leaving the staying place to carve desire paths through my life.
And my companion poem is called Go Toward What Makes You Feel Most Alive. So, go toward what makes you feel most alive is what I got when I asked an author to give me some life advice. And it's good advice, don't get me wrong. But I think it's the sort of clever advice that means different things to different people. Because as for me, I was once in a country so far across the expanse of geography and history that it was on another planet. And on that other planet, under a moon most malevolent and unfamiliar, I stumbled into a ditch of waist-high weeds, backlit by the pyre I had only just escaped from, my face and their faces cast in white and orange by muzzle flashes, ours and theirs, the zip, zip, zip of death nipping at our ears as it passed, and the snap and snarl of the death we sent back to them. And in that ditch of weeds, I felt alive, most alive.
So yeah, I see some differences between the
Very
two.
much so.
Yeah, very much. And you addressed that in your preface, the opener, in which you described Diane as, quote, a poet who values beauty in language and metaphor and imagery, while Dave is, quote, a more obvious poet, your words, I believe. What were the discussions like that arose from being so seemingly different as poets? One loving, beauty and language, and one saying, "I want it to be clear to people," because the next question obviously is going to be about form and meaning.
Yes. Okay, you get to take this one first too, because I'm so curious to hear what you say.
So, so in the preface, we mentioned that there was a lot of different email exchanges and discussions happened around all these poems, and Diane and I both critiqued each other's poems and edited them, and then we had another editor come in and look at our poems. And there was a question where uh, I think I asked Diane, I said, "Why are you so obsessed with form?" Right? Because there were things she would write, and I was like, "Well, that's beautiful, but what does that mean? What am I supposed to get from that?" And then she snapped back at me, "Why are you so obsessed with meaning?" Right? And so that kind of that's a good question. And so I think we addressed it by trying to polish each other's poems in the best way that we could in what we felt our strengths were. So for Diane, I would say, well, that's a beautiful phrase, but like if you don't tell me what it means, I think you should get rid of it. And then she would listen to me and kept them in there. No, but and then she would challenge me like, okay, it's clear what you're saying, but that's not strong poetically. That's not a strong piece. And so we sort of um we really played off each other's strengths that way. And in the end, our own personalities show through. We can't become another poet than we are,
Yes.
but I think we've got the best version of ourselves through that sort of uh, cooperative, competitive,
Uh-huh.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, it's a good
contested process.
Yes, it's a good type of challenge because I think like it's nice to like collaborate with somebody that challenges me creatively because we're also critique partners in fiction and that's kind of where we started.
Mhm.
And so I knew that it would be like a fun collaborative process in the sense that like I know that Dave doesn't let me publish mediocre work, right? Like and that's nice. And like the same for him very
Yes.
much. I don't let you publish mediocre work. But and part of it is like I think, as he said, knowing our strengths. So, like, Dave is sometimes very straightforward, and like, here it is. And I'm like, I want some more nuance, some more like complexity, or like or the things with form. Like, hey, try something experimental and like see what shakes out. And then for me, it is, looking at poems and being like, okay, well, that's just too abstract. That's not. I think one of the phrases I did keep that was a contested phrase was like I because this poem had already been previously published, so it's my poem Micro Expressions, and I mentioned like I dread the day your side mouth impressions rise a country song slip from my ridges. And the slip from my ridges is a reference to the brain. Like so like he's like, well, what is the ridges? And I'm like, well, it's like this the sulci and like the gyri, like those things are like ridges and like troughs,
Mhm.
troughs and dips and things. And so that's sort of abstract. And he's like, well, not everybody's gonna know that. I'm like, I don't really, it doesn't really matter to me because it's more like it's more the feeling of it than it is like the literal meaning of it. And so there is some of that in there. But I did appreciate the challenge to be more like direct, because today is very good at rewriting things for me as well. Like even the preface was something that I had originally wanted it to be like a transcription of a conversation, and then I read it and I was like, it just feels really forced. It's not the right tone. And then Dave just like rewrote it into the form that it is now, like more of a statement, and like summarized everything that each of us had said, and then made it this cohesive piece. Because I think cohesion is something that you do really well in both fiction and poetry. So
Mhm.
yeah.
It's funny that when you read that, what came to my mind was the ridges of your like fingers, that it would slip
Mhm.
through that, and you were being really specific about a very small detail. But now that it's the brain, I see the difference between the two of you.
I feel
Yes,
vindicated.
you feel vindicated. Well, I also think I like ambiguity in poetry. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's part of its strength is like you can interpret the same line, or like how things are juxtaposed or like enjambed, like, your line breaks, like those create ambiguity, and ambiguity is actually a good thing in
It
poetry.
it
Yes.
is a good thing in poetry. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the disagreement brewing here. Ambiguity is good,
But
but
actually,
you
but
need meaning. Okay. And I was curious about you take inspiration from a lot of different things in here, including a Soundgarden song that I'm more familiar with the Johnny Cash version of Rusty Cage.
Yes.
So when you're picking or you're struck by something and you're taking inspiration on it, how often do you have to look at what you're saying, you're picking, and say, will enough people know this? Will this work with it? Because as Diane is saying, that she's fine with the ambiguity. If you don't get it, well, you'll get the next poem.
I think for us, so Diane references what that's ekphrastic poetry where you're
yeah.
referencing another work of art. And so my ekphrastics tend to be music.
Mhm.
Um, Diane references more other poets, I think,
Yeah,
and
art.
and
Yeah.
art, also
Visual
art,
art.
visual
Mhm.
art. And so I don't think we necessarily ever said, would somebody get this reference or not? I think we
Yeah,
just
interestingly. Yeah, and I think it's because the way that we read is that we're both big readers of poetry and of fiction, and I think that something in the books that we tend to read, I think they reference things with no like embarrassment or regard for like the reader's understanding of that experience. And
right.
like for example, like Sylvia Plath's Ariel, I remember reading that and I was like, oh man, I feel like most of this is going over my head. Like I had to go look up things, look up references, like particularly like things that are mythological or things that are biblical, like things that I might not have like a personal background in. And then that's like, and it helps deepen your understanding of the poem, but there's like different, I think, layers of experience. Like, okay, I can experience this without knowing what it is, and if I do understand it, there's like another layer of like deep understanding. And sometimes poems I think have a specific audience. Like my poem Watch Me is about like early 2000s video games, like with my brother. So there's references to The Sims and Spyro, and like so stuff like that, where I don't mention the names of the games directly, but if you know, you know, kind of thing. And
Hmm.
that's really less important than like it's more about the feeling of the poem. And I don't expect readers to connect with every single poem. I hope they find a few that they're like, yeah, that resonated with me, with my experience,
Hmm.
or it made inspired me to look at something new. So yeah, it is interesting that we did not consider the reader's like knowledge base per se,
No,
but
although I don't,
yeah.
so we do like her poem is after Lucille Clifton. So if you were curious as to what that would meant, you could go look up
Right.
and find out Lucille Clifton is another poet, or
Mhm.
I wrote a poem in response to a Stephen Crane poem. And so I don't think we necessarily, like I said, I don't think we necessarily considered whether or not the poem should hopefully stand on their own, even if you haven't listened to
Mhm.
Rusty Cage. The Johnny Cash version is really good too, though. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of what
Mhm.
how we did.
And the takeaway for me was that I began listening to that song again and singing it badly in the car. So that's on you for that.
There's also a Sonic Youth reference in there too. So not in that poem, but other poems. So if you want to go back to the '90s, I'm right there with you. So
Diane and David, I want to thank you very much for talking to me today. Again, the book is called The Ship in the Storm, and I'll put links to your website online. And good luck with that. And I hope that your career as Columbus-based poets takes off and has a ton of success.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you so
much.
much.
Thank you.